Welcome to This Must Be the Place. I'm your host, Alo Galinsky. Each week, I'll uncover what's happening in Sonoma County, diving into the hidden gems and quirky corners. I'll be interviewing some of our local legends, as well as people you didn't know you need to know, all through the eyes of a craft beer enthusiast living in wine country. Join me as we explore one sip, one story, and one adventure at a time, and together we'll find out why this must be the place. On October 13th, acclaimed journalist and author Beth Macy was set to speak at Copperfield's Books in Petaluma, but unfortunately due to conflicts had to reschedule. But we were lucky enough to sit down with her to discuss her new memoir, Paper Girl, a memoir of home and family in a fractured America. Beth Macy has won more than 24 national journalism awards, including a Nieman Fellowship for Journalism at Harvard University, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and a Los Angeles Times Book Prize for Dopesick, which was made into a Peabody Award-winning series for Hulu. 3 of her books have been New York Times bestsellers. Welcome, Beth. It's an absolute honor to be speaking with you today.
Back at you, Alo. I'm stoked to be here.
We had a really great time diving into your book and learning so much about your life. And, since you were scheduled to do a reading in Sonoma County, I thought it would be a great way for our listeners to have an opportunity to hear an excerpt from your new memoir, Paper Girl. Would you like to start off with a reading for us?
Sure. And I'm starting on page 50, and it's a part about where I'm getting to how my family became fractured sort of gradually in the 2010s. And I just want to start by saying I'm really sorry I can't be there. I had to have some unexpected surgery, and my doctor just said, that's too many stops. You got to whack off the West Coast. But I spoke there, I think it was for Dopesick. And I loved the store. I loved the community, and I'm very sad not to be going there.
Copperfield holds a special place in a lot of our hearts here, and I'm sure they'll be ready to welcome you back with open arms whenever you can make it back to the West Coast. So
yes,
thanks so much, Beth.
Yeah. All right. So this is talking about my second oldest sister, Cookie, who is evangelical. I'd never known Cookie to express political opinions or follow the news, but a few years back, like many people in my hometown, she started posting pro-Trump memes on Facebook. An animated cartoon of Trump doing the twist as victory dance the morning after he beat Hillary Clinton springs to mind. She knew not to talk about Trump in front of Mom, though. Even in her mental decline, that is her dementia, Mom saw right through Trump's bluster, harumphin', I cannot stand the way he talks. I was closer to my brother Tim, who's 9 years older than me. He used to visit us in Virginia every spring and fall to see our youngest in high school plays. But we too had grown apart since Trump's election in 2016. Tim had missed the invitation to Sasha's senior play, which he would have loved, our kid hamming it up as Nathan Detroit in Guys and Dolls, the lead role, after he unfriended me on Facebook. Quote, because of all the liberal shit you post, he explained. I wasn't sure what he meant. The fact-checked articles from papers I occasionally write for, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, but his absence bewildered me. My family had once been proud of me. In March 2011, my sister Terry, 15 years my senior, went to the trouble of stuffing Post-it notes into every issue of Oh, the Oprah magazine in the checkout line of her grocery store, noting, my sister wrote this article. After Mom's death, I inherited a catalog box of every newspaper and magazine article I'd ever written, including a scrapbook Grandma Macy made of my honor roll mentions, a newspaper photo of me missing a first base catch, and some awful stories I'd written for the Urbana Daily Citizen, that's my hometown newspaper that I delivered and later wrote for as a college intern. Apparently, during the week of the Champaign County Fair, which is still the biggest happening in Urbana, I was so low on the reporter totem pole that my beat assignment was sheep. In 2021, Cookie reminded her church friends to watch the Hulu show based on my book Dopesick, only to cringe at the gay storyline and multiple F-bombs in the first episode. I know this because she accidentally included my husband in a damage control message she sent to her friends. She wrote, no nudity so far, but if Beth wasn't my sister, I would not be watching. I probably won't finish. I had settled in a medium-sized Virginia city, lived for a time in Boston and New York. My siblings all lived in rural places and within a half-hour's drive of our hometown. I worked for newspapers and then I wrote books, and they no longer believed, quote, the media, unless it came from Fox News or, in Cookie's case, Newsmax. The newspapers they'd once read had become skeletons of their former selves, their content reduced to crime, high school sports, and ads for gun shows and shooting ranges. When our eldest son announced he was getting married to the young man he'd been living with for 2 years, Tim and Cookie ignored it at first. My sister Terry offered a single like on Facebook. She had married John, an early computer tech and champion Hillary hater. Whenever I asked John how he was doing, he replied, "Deplorable." And peacemaker Terry would scold, "We already discussed this, John, no politics." When a fellow patron at their small town library overdosed in the bathroom in 2017, John was stunned. He'd been watching Fox News obsessively for a decade and no longer took the local paper, so he had no little inkling that heroin had arrived in their small Ohio town until he heard the thump in the bathroom stall.
Well, thank you so much for that, Beth. You write and speak so expressively, and just remembering all those details in there must be amazing for you to recall, and also for our listeners and your readers to be able to dig into. I love the piece about Nathan Detroit, as I grew up doing theater, and that was one of the very first musicals I ever saw, and that was one of the first roles that ever captured me as a big Frank Sinatra fan. So
love it, love it. My kid, it was even sadder that my brother missed the show because my kid's girlfriend at the time played Adelaide.
Oh no.
Opposite role.
Now, why did you select that passage as a representation of your memoir?
Well, it's kind of what got me going on it. I started with Cookie, but I didn't quite get to the part where Mom is dying in 2020. It turns out it's the Saturday after the 2020 election. And the hospice nurse's phone blinged, and she goes, they're calling it for Biden. And my sister, who had never really talked about politics, although she had posted a few things, but she had never brought it up in a really serious way, said, "Oh, it's fraudulent. You wait, he won't win." And our mom was literally breathing like, I mean, it was like you didn't know if it was going to be your last breath yet or not. And so I wrote this piece about it for the New York Times, and I said, with our shared reality gone, will I even have a family left after Mom dies? And hundreds of people wrote in. I mean, they only left it open for comments for like an hour because it was almost Christmas, and there were a lot of vacations, I assume. But hundreds of people weighed in, and then I started noticing like 1/5 of Americans are estranged from family because of politics. And just a poll last week released by New York Times and Siena showed that our political divisions are the most worrying issue Americans think we have, and that they're so bad that they don't think there's any hope that we'll be able to get things done again.
Well, that's a shame.
It is.
Now, speaking of your mom, you write in the book that your mom told you your books were too sad, that you should write a love story instead. So is Paper Girl a love story? Maybe tell us how Paper Girl is a love story.
Well, to have real love, you have to have shared true facts. And Paper Girl sort of teases apart, it peels the onion about how we became in our own silos. And I think we can begin to bridge the divide, but we have to understand, like, when we're being manipulated for political and power gain by faraway corporations, many of them based in your state, that want to make money off us and sell us more crap we don't need, right?
Sure.
And so I talk about, the end of the fairness doctrine and the digital divide that begins with the Communications Decency Act, making it so people can share things on social media, and social media can't be held liable for sharing falsehoods. As we begin to silo, I tell the story of my ex-boyfriend, who I hadn't seen in 38 years, who had gone from being super liberal and a Bernie supporter to not just QAnon, but maybe even to the right of it, like spending 4 to 7 hours a day on Russian propaganda websites. And I interviewed him for about 10 hours for the book. And he was very kind to give me all this time. And he explained how, when his friends started telling him how stupid he was for not voting for Hillary, that he vote for Jill Stein, that's a vote for Trump, and his deacon in his Catholic church took him out for beers, but really wanted to harangue him about his vote. And he just felt like his people were abandoning him, and he got really, really angry. And he then found community on the internet. And, he died in February. I was really worried about his response to the book because we stopped talking about a year ago when he became verbally abusive, almost threatening to me. No, I would not almost threatening, he became threatening to me. And he died in February because he thought Obamacare was such a, scam perpetrated on the middle class that he wasn't going to participate. He was only 63. He got pneumonia and he waited too long to go to the hospital and he died. And his daughter says, she told me not long ago, the internet killed my dad. And I think she's right.
Now, you choose to open your memoir, Paper Girl, with a story of Silas James, a contemporary young man living in Urbana. Can you tell us a little bit why you went that route in organizing your book?
I just wanted the reader to know that this is more than a memoir. This is a fully reported, it's probably 3/4 reported story. Even the family stuff, I went back and I interviewed my relatives. And one of the things I was casting about early on, starting a couple years ago, or almost 3 years ago now, is I wanted to follow a young me, that is a promising kid who's poor, to show how it had changed since I got out of Urbana 4 decades ago. And I don't say got out like I was the only way I was going to get saved, but I went to college in an era when a Pell Grant paid the full freight. And that's no longer the case. If you're as poor as I was, it pays about 30%. So even 10 years later, I wouldn't have been able to go because I had to have it fully paid for. And I have more than paid that back times 100, right, with taxes. So it's so much harder for someone like Silas. And so I begin the book with the scene of him, dropping out of college the first week because his clunker car broke down, and the scholarships he got for a community college, everybody says it's okay that the Pell Grant purchasing power is decimated, just let him go to community colleges. Well, if you're a rural kid, it took Silas an hour to get to the community college, and you have to have reliable transportation. There's no reliable transportation in most, if not all, rural areas in the United States. So his car breaks down. He's living with his mother in a very chaotic situation. She's trying to recover from opioid use disorder, and she gets in a wreck and she gets a concussion the first week of school, and so he has to stay behind and take care of her. And so just so much family chaos pulling him down. I didn't know that, of course, when I picked him. I just picked him because we were both like leaders of the high school band, and everybody raved about his work ethic and his resiliency. I had no idea how much harder it is to climb into the middle class today until I wrote this book.
Well, you saw those commonalities and then you did your research and you found this really intriguing story, it sounds like. So that's really a great way to open this memoir that's really gripping. You just mentioned your Pell Grant scholarship, and I'm curious, tell us what you learned about the state of our education system and how that's feeding into the fracturing of America.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest surprise was just attendance issues in the K-12 schools, particularly after COVID, but I was shocked at the number of kids who weren't going to school. Now, this includes homeschool, including legit homeschool, but also a lot of parents who maybe have an addiction problem or a mental health problem, who can't be bothered to get up in the morning, maybe aren't able to get up in the morning to get their kids to school. And, foster care has tripled since the opioid crisis in places like Urbana. So I followed this truancy officer, Brooke Perry, who spends all of her time driving from one end of the county to the other. And I mean, the things she sees, she gets assaulted more than once. She, has to get kids out of bed. She sees the aftermath of children being sexually abused. I mean, the county needs to have 10 of her, not one. And there's so many better ways that we can gauge how we are educating our kids other than standardized testing. What we need to focus on is building relationships between teachers, counselors, students, and making those relationships meaningful to kids today.
And it really seems like absenteeism at schools is kind of this crisis point or this maxim. Talk to us about why this is happening.
Well, I think COVID did no favors. As I said, I think a lot of it is untreated mental health. If this shutdown continues and we don't get the Medicaid expansion to stay where it is, we're going to see middle and working middle class people's healthcare costs, premiums just go up in Virginia by $1,000 a month. That's
Wow.
the average Virginian. And Virginia, it's pretty much a bellwether. And I've just been doing research on that lately. The other thing is Christian right, the far right has really worked hard to make homeschooling easier. It's basically deregulated in Ohio. You don't even have to, if you're going to homeschool, you can basically just write a post note saying, I am homeschooling James Smith, 15. Here's his social security number. We won't be showing up this year. And so there's one scene of me and Brooke showing up at this sovereign citizen's house, which is somebody who doesn't participate in taxes, although he uses the benefit of our roads, and won't send his kids to school, won't even fill out the post-it note. And she's greeted with barking dogs and a bullseye sign out in front of this beautiful farm that says, if you can read this, you're in range. I mean, that was scary.
Sure.
She had to call the deputies to come out and watch over us while she left this notice.
Wow. Now, talking more about this generation of young people and trauma especially, does your research point to a more traumatized population? And if so, where do you believe all this trauma is stemming from? Is it strictly COVID? Is it pre-COVID? Where does this all come together?
I think it all comes together with the launch of OxyContin, the follow-up of the heroin epidemic, which is now a fentanyl and methamphetamine epidemic. I think I said earlier that foster care has tripled just since 2015. And I asked the police chief to give me his numbers because we're the same age. We were in high school together. And I said, Chief Lingrel, give me a figure that helps me see how your world as a police officer has changed. He's like, how about this? When I started on the force 40 years ago, we had 40 emergency calls a year for mental health crises. Now we have 370. So that's an increase of more than a factor of 9. And, the police chief or the fire chief said the same thing, that emergency calls go up 3 to 5% every year. And, I was worried a lot of folks in Urbana, including people I still love and know well, would just think I was picking on it, but it's like, these are facts. I have these written. I have these on the record. This is what we're dealing with. And just because you don't know it, because there's almost no local news, doesn't mean it's still not out there.
Sure. Well, along with all this trauma, to put this more in a little bit of I wouldn't say positive light, but there are heroes who work with these people, with these kids, to kind of dissolve the trauma and to really dig in there. There's teachers, librarians, social workers, counselors. You portray them in your book as the heroes. And, I'd love to hear from you about one person you met while researching this book, or one person just that comes to mind from your personal life who is making a difference and how they're doing it.
Well, I'll tell you about 2 if that's okay. First, I'm going to tell you about my band director, Robert K. Martin. They always use their middle initials. He was kind of a gruff, old school dude. He was probably in the 60s when I had him. But he really kept his eye on me. And I was a bit of I was the class clown, the class partier. I was a bit of a bad girl. But I was also, he was one of my parental figures. And so I would use my wages from my paper route and my lifeguarding job to pay for private band lessons. Sometimes I would drive to them at the age of 15 without a license in the car I had stolen from my brother. You know what I mean? I was like that kind of kid. I was good, but I was bad.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
Exactly. And so I just loved band. Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score, talks about the best way to heal from our own trauma is to engage in community with people, and that humans are mammals and we're meant to play with each other like puppies. And being in that marching band just kept me out of so much trouble. And Mr. Martin always had his eye on me. He knew what my home life was like. And similarly with Silas James, the band director, who now goes by David M. Sapp, director of bands, again, that middle initial, became Silas's, I had one stable parent. Silas had no stable parents. And he became his father figure. In fact, Silas has him entered in his phone as David M. Dad, D-A-D-D. And, he would spend every lunch period in his office, sometimes brainstorming what the next move was, what the next job was, how he was going to get to college, sometimes just crying about his home or lack of home. He was homeless for much of his junior and senior years. I asked him yesterday, we did an event in Urbana yesterday, and I brought Silas and another teacher up on the stage, and I said, Silas, why do you think you are so resilient? He said, because I'm not afraid to ask for help, because I wasn't afraid of lacking a strong family, a support system to create my own out of my teachers and counselors and friends' parents.
What a great answer. I mean, you're making me think of a teacher or two that when I was in high school and going through my own stuff that I found I could confide in and talk to. And it's not easy. It's not easy to ask for help or to push yourself to do that. And 14, 16 years old, our friends aren't thinking about helping us ask for help. So it's really important to be able to learn how to develop that voice. And I just think that's really powerful. And
It's
there
a
are,
real
as I said, there's so many of
skill.
those heroes out there, for librarians, counselors, social workers. And for people to be able to find that outlet is just more important now than ever, especially in a digital age where I think talking to people is, I wouldn't say frowned upon, but it's less common.
Exactly. Very brave thing to ask for help. I can remember asking somebody to loan me money in the lunchroom of the high school cafeteria. And she was a cheerleader and came from a family of money. And I think I just wanted like a fudge sickle or something. And she goes, and I'll never forget this. Here I am, 50, how many years later? 45 years later, still recounting it word for word. She said, Beth, you always ask for things. And it was like gutting, But I tell people in the context of almost every problem. I wrote 2 books about the opioid crisis. You have to ask for help. The only solution ever to any of the problems is community and education.
Very well put. And you did mention resolving trauma. I'd like to know in that light, you did work to repair your relationship with your sister, who you had become estranged from due to family trauma and ultimately some political, religious, cultural differences. Do you have any advice out there for other families experiencing similar divides?
I do. First of all, I did a lot of reporting with sociologists and psychologists before I went because I didn't know how to do this. I mean, the easiest thing is just not to engage, right? Especially if you live 5 states away or 3 states away, like I do, 7 hours away. It's easy just not to go home. And I sort of forced myself to go home. I went home once a month for a week for 2 years. And all the experts say, first of all, don't go in with your memorized political talking points. Just go and find out who you are again, just as people. One person said, my son was about to marry his husband. And one expert said, it doesn't always work because some people are really culturally different, like me and my sister Cookie. But this psychologist said, go talk about the colors of the wedding. And I'm like, she's not going to want to talk about the colors of the wedding. Like, she didn't, she thinks he's going to hell.
Sure.
And finally, we had a very nice interview, but toward the end, I said, Cookie, we can't talk about Max because I'm really getting mad and I'm not able to use these skills. All my training went through the window. So you also have to protect yourself. My kid stopped going home to see his grandmother before I even realized it because he didn't want my sister to say something nasty to him about being queer. And that, I wish I'd have said something earlier. That just breaks my heart.
Yeah,
But
that's
the
a
thing
shame.
is, like with my brother, who I'm a little bit more culturally alike, although not that much, it's like we went fishing, which was something we used to do as a kid. Whenever we all go out, we go get a burger and a beer or something, we always do this body Irish toast that our mom did. Our mom was really, really funny. And so that's a point of connection that's always worked. Another technique that a group called Braver Angels, some of your listeners might have heard of, they do bridge work, is like, listen, don't just jump. And then, like in the case of my sister, I could have repeated back what she said in maybe a slightly less polarized way. Or I'm thinking of an example from a friend, my dear friend Joy, who thinks children are identifying as cats and bringing litter boxes to school. I basically rolled my eyes at that. I couldn't help it. And she goes, I know. How do we still love each other beyond what we can't understand or agree with? But I was talking to this expert about how I had handled that. And she said, you could have said, I hear you saying you're worried about children and how they're being educated, right? And then sort of proving that we're listening, and then asking for permission to jump in. You're looking for ways to kind of build in these little cracks of empathy. Like after my sister and I blew up at each other, she said, well, did Max get made fun of as a kid? And I said, not in preschool, but as soon as he got to kindergarten, he did. And she remembered that. And I mean, just like a little curiosity can go a long way toward building empathy and figuring out ways to open that up and to be vulnerable yourself, to say, look, I know we haven't spoken for a long time, and we definitely don't speak about X, X, and X, but I just want you to know this is really hard for me, and I'm trying because I love you, and
Right.
that's the most important thing.
And you never know where those connections, where those bridges are going to happen and what you might get to talk about down the road, but the important part is starting somewhere.
Exactly.
Now, speaking of family and reactions, have you heard from anybody on your Urbana side of the family? Have they read the book yet? And if so, do you want to tell us about some of their reactions?
Well, the book comes out tomorrow, so they haven't read it yet, but probably some people stayed up late last night reading it, because I had a pre-pub launch in Urbana yesterday, and so I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. I gave a presentation. I brought Silas and a teacher up on stage, and there were some questions. It was like 250 people were there. It was a really nice event. But I think the news of how hard things have gotten for the bottom third of the whole small city, the very little middle class versus the wealthier business class, professional class, ownership class. And one person in the book says it's either the country club or the ghetto, and neither knows what the other side is doing. So I think some people will want to pick apart some parts of the book, but as a football coach who was being interviewed about a losing season, he said, tell me exactly what I got wrong. Like, tell me exactly what you would have done instead. I have all the data to back up the stories in the book, but it's not always data that moves people.
No, it's not. You can be logical minded, data minded, or you can be you have to appeal to everybody, and I'm sure that's not easy when you're writing or thinking about what to write.
Right.
Speaking of your writing, in your book, you write that your mom said, no matter how far from home I went, no matter how much our paths diverged, she wanted me to never forget. We are your people. This is your stock.
Yeah.
After completing this memoir, do you feel this way about the community of Urbana? And is Urbana still your people in stock?
Yes. I think the fact that I had a hearty, stable of really good teachers, and that education was valued. Almost all of my friends were going to college, so I wanted to go too. And I knew from spending 12 years in school with them that they weren't necessarily any smarter than me. Maybe one or two of them were. And that the fact that I got to go basically for free, and I've contributed to society since then. I have a bit of survivor's guilt about getting out and people like Silas having such a hard time. Yeah, they are still my people. Like the night before my event in Urbana, my besties and I went out, and there was every political view represented around that table. We went to a restaurant. There was the guy who's done all the research on his family, his involvement on the Underground Railroad, who's pretty to the left. And then there was my friend Joy, who, thinks children are identifying as cats and is a evangelical broadcaster. She was there. We all got along fine. Now, we might need a moderator if we tried to have a real discussion about anything. But I think it's important to keep showing up for each other. I mean, my last reunion went off the rails, and there were even death threats. We've got to figure out a way to talk to each other again.
Absolutely. Now, switching gears a little bit here, this isn't the first thing you've written. You wrote Dopesick, as we touched upon in my intro. I'd love to hear a little bit about the experience of having your book Dopesick turned into a limited series on Hulu, and how involved were you with the adaptation? Anything you want to shed some light on there?
It was a wonderful experience. I worked very closely with the showrunner, who was basically the main writer, ran everything, directed a few of the episodes. His name's Danny Strong. Great guy. And I was part of the writing room team, one of 5, I think. And, I was heavy in the research part of it. And we would get on the phone together at night and re-interview people that I'd interviewed in the book so that he could write perfect dialogue that sounded like the way he talked. And, you know, people would leak us documents. And one night he was rewriting the script before they were shooting it the next morning because the lawyers were making sure we had all our facts buttoned up. And, you know, we got a document leaked to us that helped us button up some facts. So that was really fun. The best part of it was, and I'm really proud of it, the best part of it was, is it brought the story of who the real perpetrators are to millions of people in a way that, in an audience so big that a book doesn't quite reach. And my favorite example of that is my friend Ben Rubin, who was in the writer's room with me. It was during COVID. The show had just come out, and he was standing in line at CBS, and they gave us these Hulu masks. He was wearing his Hulu mask, and this woman behind him goes, "Hey, have you seen that new show on Hulu called Dopesick?" And he goes kind of sheepishly, "Yeah, I actually worked on that show. I'm a writer." And she goes, "Oh, it's a great show." She goes, "You know, for the first time in 3 years after watching that show, I called up my addicted son."
Wow.
And just to know that something you've put out in the world is changing the way people think about something, allowing them to open their hearts, is pretty cool. They let me get pretty in the weeds with things like medication-assisted treatment and, you know, all these storylines that you see Michael Keaton wrestling with in the last couple episodes.
That sounds, I mean, it's amazing how these things do touch people, and you don't know until you hear of it. You imagine and hope that it's out there, but until you have an experience like that, you don't know for sure. And so to be able to get that feedback must be really meaningful.
Yeah, kind of a top 5 experience.
I bet.
It didn't even happen to me. It happened to Ben, but
it still happened to you. It's because of you, and
yeah.
that's important to take home.
Okay.
So a little fun one for you. I know you're an accomplished and avid author, but you must love to read in your free time when you have the free mental space to do so. Are there any books on your nightstand? And if you're not involved in reading right now, what are you reading or hoping to read next?
Great question. I have very limited luggage because I'm going to like 6 cities in the next week. And so I was like, I'll just pick up something at the airport. And this book is fantastic. I just started it. The Safe Keep.
The Safe Keep, okay.
Yeah, Yale Vanderwooden. It was a runner-up for the Booker Prize last year. Fantastic. There's not a bad sentence written by the author Maggie O'Farrell. I'm a big fiction reader. I like to just disappear in a world. I've had enough of opioids and hard things, so I like to kind of just disappear. And I mean, Geraldine Brooks is one of my all-time favorite writers, Anna Quinlan. But recently I went through every single book Maggie O'Farrell had written. I kind of do that. I get on these kicks. Lily King has a new book out tomorrow too, and she's one of my I've read all of her backlist, and I'll have to get that.
Well, keep your eyes out for a new book by Lily King to our listeners, and keep your eyes out for what's coming next from Beth Macy. Is there anything that you can tease us with? What can our listeners and your readers expect coming from you next?
Oh, well, tomorrow I have an excerpt of Paper Girl running in the Atlantic, which I'm really excited about. They did a lovely job with it. You know, I have these beautiful photos provided by this photographer I always work with, Josh Meltzer. So that'll be amazing. And I also have an interview on Fresh Air tomorrow. Basically, I'm just working on this book and hope to be contributing to the discussion about how we can bridge these divides in the coming months.
Well, it was a really powerful read. I was so blessed to be able to get a little sneak preview of it myself. Beth, as we wrap up here, just one kind of final big picture question for you. As someone who is so well versed in the ills of America, what gives Beth Macy hope?
The people on the ground doing the work, the people that are in the schools and running around in their cars with 115,000 miles that they got from being the truancy officer, the people who are helping addicted people. One of the things I started doing since the last election is all these federal cuts are hitting my local community is I've started like packing Narcan kits and helping the Harm Reduction Coalition save people from overdose. And I think we have to begin to organize and to mend these fractures and to build alliances with other like-minded people. I mean, I think we can all agree that babies deserve to have diapers. I joined the board of a local diaper bank. And what can you build into your activity every week that can help you build your network among people who are doing the most for the least?
To our listeners out there, I'm going to leave Beth Macy's interview with that question and ask you if you want to give that some thought. Leave us a comment on our podcast. When you're listening to this, leave us your answer to that question that Beth Macy can maybe go back and revisit and see what everybody else out there is thinking. Beth, thank you so much for being here. To our listeners, Paper Girl, a memoir of home and family in a fractured America, releases tomorrow, and I hope you go out there and get a copy for yourself. Thank you so much, Beth, for appearing on This Must Be the Place.
Thank you, Alo.
Take care, and I hope to see you around Sonoma County when you're able to reschedule a book talk out here.
Oh, I'm going to count on that. Also, is the name of your podcast from the David Byrne song, the Talking Heads song?
You're absolutely correct.
That's on my funeral playlist. I want that song played at my funeral. I love that song.
Well, to everybody out there who might be listening from Beth Macy's personal life, take that to heart. There's nothing I can do right there with that, but it's a fantastic song and a fantastic way to connect people with what's going on in this wonderful town and county we call Sonoma. So thank you again, Beth. Good luck on your book tour and good luck with everything in the future.
Appreciate it.
Take care.
Bye.
The interviews are done, which means I think it's time to crack one open. Interviews make me thirsty, and I want you thirsting for knowledge about some great beer, both local and not so local. Each week, I'll introduce you to a beer I find discussion-worthy and explain the nuances of what makes it fantastic in my eyes and why you should give it a try. And just to keep it on point, I'll even try to make sure the beer reflects the vibe or theme of the episode. While poring over Beth Macy's memoir and thoroughly enjoying our conversation about her roots, in this segment this week, I thought I'd go one better than only cracking one open. As I sit here with a pour from a recently purchased crowler of one of Crooked Goat's flagship IPAs, Ibex, I thought I'd spend this segment talking about the beer scene in the town of my roots, Sebastopol. Having lived here since I was 9 years old, it's been amazing to see the town grow up, and with it the arrival and sad departures of some great beer. Right now, the town beer scene is anchored by Crooked Goat Brewing, who just celebrated 8 years of business a couple months ago. They're a non-fussy and fantastic community spot with lots of different seating areas, which is hard to come by in breweries these days. From an outdoor patio to a lounge area in the back to those ubiquitous bar stools, there's a place to perch and kick back with a beer for everyone. Now, Ibex is one of their core IPAs. Hopped with Simcoe, Amarillo, and Citra hops, give it a great punch of citrus and earthiness blending together. It's a nice blend of old school and newer school in terms of hops, a bit what like Sebastopol is like. Other places to grab a beer in town are fairly limited, with Hop Muck Tavern being the other anchor spot that has live music or something going on most every night of the week. They sport a nice rotating draft list of seasonals, and whether you want to be in their cozy pub or underneath the stars in their beer garden, there's once again a place for everyone. One place that surprised me for its beer selection? The Punchdown Wine Bar back in the Barlow. While they have no draft selections, they do keep a fridge stocked with lots of unique options. From European imports to beers from renowned breweries in Southern California, go peruse the fridge next time you're over there. I'd love to hear from you listeners out here. What's a hometown spot you love to grab a drink? You can email us or leave in the comments section of the podcast. Cheers from your host and craft beer concierge. And a huge thanks to the wonderful Beth Macy for her appearance on this week's episode of This Must Be the Place. This Must Be the Place is produced by our friends at Pod Locally, an audio platform helping local voices connect to their communities. Don't forget to like, subscribe, or comment on all your favorite podcast apps, and visit the show notes for more information, links, and resources. Look out for our next drop on Sunday. Until then, I'm your host, Alo Galinsky, saying have a great week.